At long last, I finally get to see the famous splat, 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 splat scene animated. When I first saw this in the light novel, I truly fell in love with Overlord at that moment. I was already a fan. I already was a big fan of following, like, the main villain of the story. I was a fan of Ainz' character and how he was slowly losing himself to his role-playing side as the undead Ainz. And when Volume 9 eventually came around, and Volume 10 and all that, and you get to see this scene. You get to see the iconic scene of when Ainz is using a super tier magic spell, and in an instant, soon as he tries to use it, just 70,000 people just drop dead instantly. It was a turning point for the story. And in a lot of ways, people would say that this is the peak of Overlord's hype moments. Like, there's been a lot of great moments after this, like, scene in the light novel, but this was definitely one of the highest peaks that Overlord ever achieved, because it was the first time we really got to see Ainz do something just truly horrific. I mean, we already saw what he did with the workers entering into Nazarick and what he did to them. We saw how horrible that was, and it was bad. And, you know, I talked about this already in length in my previous episode reviews, but that was nothing in comparison to what happened in this episode, but also this part in the light novel. Because 70,000 people literally just got, like, snapped, like Thanos snapped, like, out of existence instantly, and then that was just the start of it all. Once 70,000 people dropped, then the goats spawned, 5 of them, and started rampaging through the army. So, if you really factor up all the numbers, like putting all the numbers together, it's easily over 70,000 people. Over easily 100,000 people. I'm not going to give the exact total yet, because that would obviously be spoiler reasons, but I think it's pretty safe to consider that Ainz has effectively pretty much wiped out the entirety of the army like it's pretty much nothing. Now, here's the big point here. What makes this such a high peak for Overlord is because it really makes Ainz as a character to where there's just no coming back from this. I mean, yes, he's undead, and it's technically like, you know, one of the great strengths and weaknesses of undead is that they don't really feel anything. And you can kind of see from this moment that Ainz really no longer has any attachment to what his race once was, humanity. He has no attachment whatsoever, when he easily just has 70,000 people die, and then he has the goats just rushing through everybody. You're like, Ainz is gone. He is no longer a good man. He is no longer someone that you could say could even be human anymore. Even if he has the appearance of the undead, you could assume that his human version inside of his head might come to terms like, I shouldn't do this, but when you see this scene, you're like, he's too far gone. There's just no coming back from it. And that's what made me really fall in love with this, and I started associating Ainz as some form of, like, Lich King, because he legit gave no crap about anybody in that battle. And what was really horrific was that when everybody was just getting destroyed, and you have both armies just being absolutely terrified, Ainz is like, applaud my greatness, and you just see everybody start clapping real fast and all that, which I think is absolutely hilarious in the anime, by the way. Like, even though it's ugly looking because of the CGI, which I'll get into that later on in this video, I have to admit, the way the CGI looks so unsettling and just weird looking, it really fit the tone of the hysteria and how scared everybody was in that moment. Like, when you just see the army just, you know, clapping, you know, continuously, non-stop, they're just truly terrified of what Ainz is capable of, because if he's able to do something like that just so easily, you know, just kill over probably 100,000 people like nothing, then what could he do to them? So, obviously, everybody was just absolutely terrified, and when they started clapping, and he's just like, applaud my greatness, you're like, do you realize what you just did? You just did something that is just beyond evil. Like, you are truly an evil man to do that. And I thought that scene, the way it was delivered in this episode, was definitely a proper adaptation from the light novel. I will definitely not fault the adaptation for that. That was really good on that part. Now, the only disappointment I truly have with this episode, besides the CGI, which I think by now, if you're watching Overlord, I think you should expect CGI. I think that's just common sense by now, okay? It's very obvious that Overlord doesn't have, like, a high production value. It's obvious that there's a lot of CGI thrown in. I don't know exactly the inner workings with the workers and what they have to do, but overall, Overlord has always had problems when it comes to its art and animation. I mean, it's had some good episodes that look really great, but most of the time there is a lot of CGI, especially for the monsters and stuff, and, you know, I expected to see the Dark Young with CGI. It was something I already kind of expected. I mean, if you look at the opening song, you see CGI type Dark Young popping up, so I was already expecting to see some form of CGI versions of them, and so that was not really too big of a surprise to me. But the biggest disappointment I personally have with the way the episode was done was that it really didn't showcase the brutality of what the, you know, Dark Young did. Yes, there was a lot of scenes where you see them stomping through the army, and they're crunching them, and yes, it's brutal. It's definitely brutal. If you're an anime only, from your perspective, it's just messed up, and you know that these, you know, goats are just destroying everybody. But in the light novel, there was literally an entire page dedicated, no joke, you probably think I'm lying, but it's no joke, there was an entire light novel or book page just with nothing but the word splat, 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 splat. Yes, all down a page, because that was literally every step the goat would take would be a person or people, and you kind of get the sense of what the splat means. And it just showed how awful it was, and how many people were just gone like that. And you got to see a little bit of the inner psyche of people, how they were freaking out, how they were scared, they were trying to run and all that, and they couldn't do anything, how some tried to stand up to it, and they couldn't even penetrate its defenses at all, and they just fell to it like it was nothing. It just, that was shown in the light novel, but obviously it was cut out. That's probably my biggest disappointment, is that we just didn't really get to see the full extent of how graphic that scene was. But at the end of the day, I do know that censorship is a thing, and I feel like the reason why some of it was probably not shown was probably because of censorship, because Overlord gets pretty dark. It gets really messed up, especially in the later volumes after this. It's some pretty messed up stuff that happens, and so I do believe that if it's not just production value and all that, and like directing, I do believe it probably comes down to censorship, and so I'm not that upset. I think the point got across of how inhuman Ainz is, and how brutal the Dark Young are, but I feel like there wasn't a whole lot of context to them, and it wasn't a lot of explaining to what they really are capable of, for the audience can truly understand what makes them just so frightening. I want to clarify for you anime onlys what the Dark Young really are, for you can kind of understand why so many people are terrified, and why nobody really can do anything at all. Now, it's very obvious that Ainz, he's on a whole other level, okay? I've talked about this, we all know this at this point in time. You know, one of his low-tier undead spells, which is Death Knights, is literally stronger than almost anyone in this entire world. So, obviously, if he's going to use something like a super-tier magic spell, which he even said at the beginning of the episode, it's going to be something ridiculous. Now, just to give you a level range of where the Dark Young is at, it's at level 90s. Yes, they're in the 90s. That's pretty much near max level, unless, you know, there's a higher level than, you know, 100, but they're pretty much near the, you know, the old world, the game's max level. So you gotta imagine, throwing in 5 level 90s in the middle of a battlefield with a bunch of scrubs that are probably level 5 to between maybe level 20 something, that's ridiculous. And so nobody stood a chance at all. Even Gazif, which is the, you know, the kingdom's treasure, someone that is their main warrior, couldn't even do anything. It kind of explained that scene of how ridiculous it was when he was trying to detect the weaknesses of the Dark Young. There was no weaknesses. Now, this doesn't mean that the Dark Young has no weaknesses. I just want to clarify that. The only reason why he couldn't detect, like, a possibility of, like, you know, maybe winning to weaknesses is because his level was so low. Gazif, by no means, is a weakling. In the New World, he is a pretty strong individual. He is definitely someone that can pretty much reach the realm of heroes. He is that crazy strong. But, like I said, he's still nowhere near where Ainz is at and the NPCs are at. But the point is, though, is Gazif, if he cannot detect a weakness, then nobody can detect a weakness. And it's pretty much like implied that the reason why he couldn't was because he was just so weak that there was just nothing he could do. It had such overwhelming power compared to him that even if it had a weakness, it wouldn't matter in the end. Like, for instance, let's say its weakness was sword slashes, which he used in this episode. It wouldn't matter because that creature is just so high level and so strong compared to him that even if he used the weakness, it wouldn't do anything to him. It's like Ainz. How Ainz, when people attack him with some of his weaknesses, it doesn't even affect him because, he's just so high level. He's so OP, his defenses are just so great that they can't do anything to him. So yeah, that's the point there, is that the Dark Young were just so overpowering, nobody could stop them. They're literally moving fortresses. That's all they pretty much are. They're a fortress of defense, and you really can't stop them when they start fighting. Now, to also give context to this super tier magic spell, the name, to the Dark Young, to their appearance, to the usage of why Ainz used it, basically the Dark Young was one of the favorite super tier magic spells that was used in the game. And it was just very popular. It was a popular spell. And Ainz decided he wanted to use it. He used the spell for multiple reasons. Number one, he wanted to use the spell to just see how it works in the New World. But number two, he also wanted to know if there was anybody that was a player amongst the armies. Because if there was a player, they would stop him in the middle of that super tier magic casting. See, here's an example. You're playing an RPG. Let's say you're playing World of Warcraft. You most likely know when you're channeling magic, if you get attacked by, let's say, an NPC, boss, whatever, a player, it could interrupt your spell casting. Like, you're trying to cast, let's say, a summoning spell, okay? Trying to summon, let's say, a succubus or whatever, all of a sudden someone attacks you and interrupts your spell, and you gotta start all over, which is like a 10-second, cast time. That's pretty much what Ainz was checking for. If anyone was going to attack him while using that super tier spell and interrupt him, that would mean that there was a player among them. So he was acting like a decoy. He was acting like bait in that moment. He was using himself as bait to determine if there was anyone amongst both armies that could challenge Ainz. And so when he was able to use it and summon it, he knew right then and there nobody could challenge him and he could just have free reign. But he still told Mare to actually be on guard. That's the reason why he said that, was because even though nobody interrupted him and nobody attacked him while he was trying to do that, there could still be someone hiding just waiting for their chance to attack. So that was the reason why Ainz said that. But that was the big reason Ainz used that ability. He wanted to test how it was in the New World, but also be a decoy. Now, another thing too is the spell that is used, it's a super tier spell. It's a very high level spell. It's definitely something that comes with a lot of cost compared to the normal spells that you see in Overlord, like for instance summoning Death Knights and all that. It has more effects, negative effects and stuff like that, and obviously using Dark Young is not something Ainz can use continuously. He cannot just spam it out constantly. And to go one step further than that, Ainz as well, the reason why he was so happy when he did summon 5 of them was because he actually broke a record. In the game, there was only, I forget the exact number, I believe it was 3. I believe the actual old record of Dark Young that was summoned was 3. 3 of those goats were summoned by that spell from the game. But Ainz was able to summon 5 in the New World, in which that's why he was so happy, was because he broke a record that nobody ever beat, or nobody ever could beat now, because, he's, from what he assumes, the only player in this world. So you gotta imagine from a gamer's perspective, if you were to break a record, you would probably be extremely happy. And so that's the reason why Ainz was so happy when he summoned 5 of them, was because he broke a gamer record. He was able to summon 5 instead of just 3 or maybe even 2. He got 5, which is ridiculous. Now, to explain the appearance and the name of the Dark Young, they are a reference to H.P. Lovecraft. I think Lovecraft is a pretty well-known author, and I mean, Lovecraftian horrors are something that I think everybody might know about, Cthulhu and stuff, and so that's what the Dark Young are kind of based off of, stuff like that, Lovecraftian, and that's why the name sounds so weird, was because it's literally based off of stuff like that. So yeah, give a context of why they look like they do, so grotesque, tentacly, and just like, a Cthulhu or something, it's because they're based off of H.P. Lovecraft. I guess let's talk about the 4 people Ainz said that should not die, or that he didn't want the Dark Young to kill. And it's pretty safe to assume what 3 out of those 4 potentially are. We know for a fact it's Gazif, because, he popped up at the end of the episode to confront Gazif, like, become my subordinate. So, obviously, Gazif is a part of the 4 that he mentioned. Now, we could also assume Brain is a part of it, because, Brain and Gazif are together, and if Ainz does want to get, Gazif on his side. So if he was to kill Brain, it would make it to where, he would get Gazif upset. So obviously we could count Brain a part of the, the 4 people. And then when we think about the Golden Princess's dog, obviously, he is probably a part of that list as well. Because, I mean, she's already in talks with Demi. Albedo's already been mentioning that she wanted to talk to her. So obviously the dog to the Golden Princess is, definitely someone that's a part of that list too. So who is the 4th? Who is the one that Ainz said he didn't want to kill? The last remaining one. Now, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm just going to throw out some speculations and let you figure it out yourself. But you could assume a couple of people. You could assume it might be Raven, which, I talked about already, the guy that has the kid and was like a really good human, and we even see him talk with Gazif in this episode. Maybe he is a part of that list. But if it's not Raven, maybe it is the king. And the reason why it could potentially be the king was because, he's the king of the kingdom, and he has a lot of potential. He is someone that governs, his country. And so obviously, if Ainz wants to get the kingdom on his side, or, get things from them, killing off the king probably wouldn't be the best move. So when you think about it, Raven or the king could be the ones that, are part of that list. So we don't really know who's on the chopping block and who isn't, but we do know at the very least who the 3 people are. So yeah, just giving you that, giving a little bit of context to what Ainz was talking about. I guess let's talk about the audience, or the people that were watching what Ainz did, to give some context to the way they looked. So I've already mentioned that they were clapping and they were in hysteria and all that. They were scared, and for good reason. I mean, honestly, that scene in the light novel, there was a description of how the people felt. The soldiers, they were absolutely terrified. The horses literally wanted to just get up and run. Like, they wanted to buck people off and just run. That's how terrified the horses were. And these were some battle horses that were just straight up, like, trained to deal with fear and stuff. But they just, bucked and they wanted to go. And the soldiers, they were all terrified, chattering, shaking, didn't know what to do. And they just wanted to flee right then and there. And many of them actually felt really bad for what was happening to the kingdom. Because, look, they were there to start war, yes. But even then, though, there's still humanity amongst people going to war with each other. I mean, war does lack, a lot of things in terms of being nice to each other. And in a lot of ways, humans can be demons to each other. But still, what Ainz did was something that, honestly, no man should ever do if you're getting into a fight. And many of them, while watching, were just absolutely terrified because they're like, if he can do something like this to his enemies, what would happen if we turned against him? If we were to turn against this man, would he turn those goats to us, kill us one day? And so everybody was scared. Everybody was scared because they thought that they were probably next. They were going to die, and they also were like, this man, he is just pretty much being so brutal that we feel really bad for the opposing, side. Like, they don't deserve that type of, demise of what they were going through. So yeah, it was, I think, properly displayed. I definitely think that Madhouse did a good job with displaying the terror of the soldiers. So I think overall, the episode was okay. I don't think it was as good as the light novel. I want to be honest. I don't think this episode was as good. I don't. But I don't think it is as bad as many are saying. The only reason why people are complaining about this as much as they are is because of the CGI, which I don't think is that's not the big issue here. I think what it really comes down to is the weight, the emotional weight of certain scenes. And yes, the CGI can mess with those scenes, I'm not going to lie. But the CGI is not what really mattered the most to me in this episode. It was just the weight or the impact of the deaths of the soldiers to the spell. But I do have to admit that this definitely wasn't the best episode, and I'm kind of a little bit disappointed that it didn't perfectly represent why I'm in love with Overlord and why I love it so much, but, maybe things happened and they just couldn't do it. Maybe they couldn't produce it, make it look as good as they possibly could, but who really knows? But anyways, I want to end this video here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. And if you want to get notified for whenever I upload a video, please click the bell icon down below. And with that, Chibi out.